As we create a map of our lives as people, it's really important to know where we're starting from. And so here at Personality Hacker, myself and Antonio have talked a lot about what's called the "you are here" dot. And it's your personality, it's the place on the map you're beginning. Because if you have a map and you don't know where you're starting from, the map is pretty much useless. But we focus a lot on that. But what about all the terrain and areas of life you have to navigate to where you want to go? The things you want in life, the relationships you want, the career you want, the type of lifestyle you crave. Like, to get all of that, you have to navigate a bunch of terrain and energies and the roads of life, right, on this map to get to that destination. And some of those roads you're more equipped to go on than others. So in this video, what we'll talk about is doing a life audit, looking at your life from top to bottom or bottom to top, whichever direction you want to start, and auditing every layer or energy of life that you have to be associated with. You have to show up to in some way, and assessing where you are in each of those areas.
So an audit is basically a way to spot hidden numbers, right? What are the elements or components that are maybe hidden underneath something or have been forgotten or something that we really haven't touched for a while? So doing an audit in your life around the components we talked about in the previous video, which were these 8 different slices of life, basically means looking at elements that you might not have been paying attention to for some time. Maybe even intentionally compartmentalize them or shove them away because they're not part of the thing that causes intrinsic reward. We talked in the last video about being pre-wired to focus on certain elements of life and getting intrinsic reward for those things, being motivated to do those things because they give you a chemical hit, and then all the other areas of life that you are not rewarded for paying attention to. So an audit is never exactly a good time, but it produces a lot of great content and information, particularly things that might have gone dark for a while.
We can make it fun, though. We can help make it more fun than like a tax audit or a accounting audit.
Nothing we do will ever be a tax audit. I promise, because that is the area of life that I shove to the side, all of those components. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about focusing on areas of life that might not be your favorites, but might evidence or sort of emerge a bunch of great information. Now, I'm gonna get really esoteric first. Is that okay? Can I get just a little esoteric?
Let's do it.
All right, I'm gonna go all the way back to Carl Jung, who talked about a concept called individuation. Individuation is effectively taking a path that allows you to discover what he called your whole self on the other side. It's separating yourself from the outside world to discover who you were meant to be. And personality is a component of this. Jung talked about personality as being an act of great courage. And I think he called it high courage because of all of the different things that have to go into not only forming a personality, but allowing a person to be able to access it, to be able to understand what one's personality is. And that is the path of individuation, the path of understanding who you are meant to be. The path of individuation requires us to tap into 4 archetypal energies or understandings of ourselves. These 4 archetypes are what Jung called the persona, the ego, the shadow, and finally whole self. He talked about other archetypal energies and other archetypes as well, but for the sake of this video, let's stick with those 4.
Yeah.
Persona is our interfacing with the outside world. It's our relationship between ourselves and everybody else, right? And the persona needs to be an accurate representation of what we know about ourselves at the time that we have that persona, meaning that we need to accurately represent who we are. And if we don't do that, then inside of ourselves, there creates a schism. It's basically a form of dissonance, right? Cognitive dissonance is another way of saying it, which is we feel like we're kind of getting away with something. We feel like we're lying. If our persona or our relationship to the outside world is in any way off and we know it, regardless of whether or not we're allowing ourselves to see that, we'll register it. An important aspect of any of the slices of life that has to do with our engagement with the outside world, that means that we have to be honest about how we feel about ourselves in that way, how we're presenting ourselves to other people, and we have to be rigorously honest about it. Meaning that if we show up and we're a person who's like, I don't have to bathe. Bathing is for sheep, right? Like only losers think it's important to bathe or whatever, right? I don't have to have a job. I can let other people subsidize me, right? Like I get to just lay around on a couch all the time, right? And now you're building reputation. Now you have other people engaging and interacting with you based on the persona you're presenting to them. And it can go all the way from the misfits, sort of anarchist, you can't tell me what to do, all the way up into like a pristine image that is like perfectly modeled for, say, Instagram. Like everything is just so. Everything is like all the hairs are in place. Both of these things are an accurate representation of, a human, right? What it means to be a person. And when we have inaccurate representations to the outside world, it means that our relationship and engagement with the outside world is off enough so that our internal consciousness and even unconscious components of ourselves will register it, and it will start to contort, all right? So part of the audit that we need to make with ourselves or to understand ourselves is to have an honest assessment, an honest audit of how we are representing ourselves to the outside world. And that doesn't mean that you can't do a little, what's the phrase? Fake it until you make it.
Yeah.
That's part of intent. We can communicate intent to the outside world. And that's okay. It's okay if our persona has a little bit of intent in it, a little bit of fake it till you make it. But it's not okay for our persona to be a lie. Now, the person who has absolutely everything Instagram model perfect might be lying to themselves, probably is to some extent, but is mostly trying to present an image for outer world expectations, right? They're trying to present an image so that they get the reward structures, the extrinsic reward structures from the outside world. The person who has this sort of, damn the man, you can't tell me what to do, is usually dealing with a lot of issues around personal responsibility. It's more about relationship to self and fearing that if they presented themselves to the outside world in a certain way, it still wouldn't measure up. So you've got two different styles that are effectively leaning on the outside world to tell them their worth and value. One is rebelling against the idea, and the other one is conforming to the idea. But both of them are missing the component of the intrinsic piece, which is, who am I in all of this? How is my inner world being represented in this persona? So remember, in the archetype of persona, the audit means tapping into the component of ourselves that is interfacing with the outside world. The second archetype is called ego. And this is basically everything that we are conscious around, everything we know about ourselves. It doesn't have to be only good news, okay? It can also be owning imperfection. And in part, it's because everybody knows if you will only ever own perfect things, you're kind of an obnoxious person. So we've been socialized out of just only ever thinking of ourselves as perfect and pristine. Some people still do. They haven't gotten the memo, but they don't have a good relationship with their ego. If you've got a good relationship with your ego, you're going to own the good and the bad. You're going to own the stuff that you're like, yeah, I'm not so great in this area, but I'm really great in this area. Or at least a healthy ego will. So when you're doing your audit, the important thing about the ego is everything that you are conscious and aware of yourself, that you are being accurate there as well. You are owning the things you're good at, and you're owning the things you're not so good at. This is called modesty, all right? It's an accurate assessment of where one is actually at. And that requires a combination of both the introverted functions and the extroverted functions, or an understanding of ourselves internally and externally. Kind of like with persona, only instead of building a relationship to the outside world, this is more about building a relationship with the self.
I just want to take a moment to reflect that this is not absolute. Like, let's just talk about persona for a second. When you're presenting well to the world, let's say you dress up professionally to go into a professional environment, and you're presenting who you are to people in a professional setting, that's not the whole sum of who you are. You're only presenting an aspect of yourself. You can't present exactly how you show up inside to the outer world. There has to be some wiggle room there. How would I say it? You're shining it on in some degree. You could say, well, right. What about me, Joel? I'm the person that Tony talked about a while ago. I don't do my hair. I don't take a shower. I don't care how I look and move through the world. It doesn't matter to me. Well, let's say you're still not showing exactly who you truly are, because there's part of you that does care about that. So none of your persona is going to be pure in its expression. It's always a persona. It's an interfacing with the world that we do. It's about the tension point, how much of it we want to present to somebody else, how much of it is reflecting truly what's going on for us versus going ahead and giving the other person they're experiencing the interface with us. So there's no perfection here that we're going after.
Yeah, your persona is never going to be a complete representation of yourself, right? Anytime we have an interface with ourselves in the outside world, there's going to be some stuff that's lost in translation, and that's just how it is. And to speak to your point about a person who might say something like, well, I don't care at all. Well, unfortunately, your persona is not good there either, because by not caring, you no longer attract other people to be able to get to know who you are really anyway, because now they're put off by the prickly nature, or they're put off by elements that are off-putting, right? They're put off because you're off-putting. And that's not a real representation either, because we all want relationships with others, right? We all want to be able to engage and interact. So the third archetype is the shadow. And the shadow is all the stuff we're not conscious of. Here's where the bad news lives. And by bad news, I don't mean imperfections. I mean low down, dirty tactics of survival. This is the part of us that's willing to do anything and everything to survive in a dark alley when you are attacked. That's really effectively what the shadow was designed for, was to be able to pull on the lowest components of who we are to fight a world that is not designed to be fair. All right, so it's the not fight fair parts of us. And when we tap into our shadow, we see a bunch of stuff that is really disconcerting. All right, this is not just the answer to the question, if you as an employee, what are your faults? Sometimes I work too hard.
I care too much.
I care too much, right? It's not that part. That's all ego, all right? That's the ego trying to make itself put a little bit of patina, a little shine on everything. There's no shine on the shadow, right? The shadow is just bad news usually. Now, sometimes other things are in there, elements and resources and components that are waiting for us to pay attention to it, so that we understand that we are complete people, right? We're light and dark. We're good and bad, so to speak. We have components of ourselves that allow us to tap into energies and behaviors where we can feel sympathy for people who are in bad ways as well. The shadow is critical important, because the less we look at the shadow, the further away we are from whole self and individuation, meaning that we don't really get to know ourselves. We just get to see all the shining pieces. And that turns us into gilded personalities. We're gilded, but we're not gold all the way through. We just have that outer layer that we're presenting to other people, but then now we have a schism of ourselves, because we know there's a bunch of content that we're not looking at. When we do an audit of ourselves, a part of that audit doesn't have to be seeing all of the shadow, because that's actually something that's going to take years and years and decades and probably the rest of your life, and you'll probably die before you run out of all of that content. But it's really doing an audit on how much of a relationship you have with that part of yourself, and how much territory there really is to go explore. Like, how much have you been pushing it away? Are you even able to bridge and observe that there is a way to get to that part?
There is an access point to see some of the shadow elements in us as people. Anytime we're triggered by the world around us or people around us, that is a shadow glimpse moment. We're seeing something in our shadow spark and come up, and we're seeing it, and then what we do with that is our choice. But those moments when we feel triggered throughout the world, that's our shadow trying to tell us something. There's something hidden in the literal shadows of our life, of our personality, of our wiring, of our psychology. And those triggers are bringing them to the surface for us to deal with. So I'd like to reframe, as you think about this audit, first of all, think about the things that are triggering to you. What triggers you the most? Those are probably access points to your shadow as you audit your life. And then you could just determine, okay, these are the things, what are they associated with in my shadow? You can start to make a short list of them and see it as an opportunity, not as something to be avoided. When you get triggered, it's like, thank goodness I was triggered around this. Now I have insight into my shadow, so I can actually deal with this going forward. It's actually a blessing. It's a positive in your life, not a negative.
Right. What we tend to do as people is, when we get triggered by things that are content in our shadow, we project them onto other people. we make them the bad guy, right? Well, you triggered
made me.
Yeah, you triggered this in me, so that must be your problem, right? That must be you doing this. We are not triggered by things that don't live in our shadow, right? If they are triggering us, then that means that there is something inside of us that is content around who we are. And that makes triggers powerful audit tools. I think that that's a great way of looking at that. They're powerful tools to audit our relationship to ourselves. So going through an audit of our personality and our path of individuation will tell us how close we are to whole self, right? Whole self meaning that we get a larger and larger amount of territory to explore ourselves as we go down this road. Now, bringing it back to the previous video where we talked about these 8 different slices of life. All of this, by the way, and thank you for allowing me to be esoteric for a moment, but all of this is effectively a path towards self-understanding and self-awareness and bringing more and more of the unconscious into the conscious. And why is that so critical? It's critical for the same, Carl Jung's most famous quote at this point might be that whenever we have unconscious elements, paraphrasing, whenever we have unconscious elements and we don't make them conscious, they control us from the shadows and we call them fate. There is so much in our world on an individual level, navigating our personal lives, and on a macro level of entire cultures, societies of people, and demographics that are behaving from unconscious places, that are behaving from the shadow and calling it fate, projecting it out to other people, creating conflicts that may or may not need to continue on. Now, whether or not we can do anything about this on a macro global level, the one thing we do have control over is our relationship to ourselves and how much we are going to bring from an unconscious place into a conscious place. So a life audit allows us to tap into these different elements, these different energies, these different components of who we are. And while there aren't just 8 slices of life, right? If we're going to pare everything down to just 8 things, it is an oversimplification. You can see this model as an on-ramp to even access this part of who you are, because otherwise we have no guardrails. Like, there is no high school class that talks about getting into your shadow. There is no college course that really dives deep into the individuation of a human being. Not that I really ever tapped into.
I would say most people don't want you to, because you make them feel deeply uncomfortable. If you're doing that work, they're like, whoa, that's bringing up stuff for me. Please just sit down, shut up, just do what you're told so we can all just be chill here. We don't want to get into this stuff. Right. I think that's really the message we get in these environments.
Yeah, well, and even if there's, like, say, a college course that teaches these concepts, it certainly doesn't create an environment where you as an individual diving into all of that is part of your course credit, right? Like, you don't have to necessarily become an individuated person in order to pass the class. So there's really no place that guides us to these components of who we are. And what models do and systems do, particularly ones that are at the baseline created by who I think is a genius, Carl Jung, they're simply access points to get to these parts of who we are. So they're not the whole story, right? It's not the complete truth, but it is a very powerful guide rail and on-ramp to access these parts. So when we're going to do an audit of our life, right, a full audit, we don't have to take absolutely every tiny little piece and pick it up and go, what's my relationship to this one little thing? You'll sit there and you'll count beans for eternity. But you can look at these slices of life and go, okay, I'm going to do an audit of my relationship to the present, of my ability to generate my own energy, of my ability to have an experience and be in the experience and remember the importance of being alive and have a relationship to my body and have a relationship to the environment. You can do an audit of your relationship to your past. Are you forgetting about it? Does it make you deeply uncomfortable? Is every time you go into it something that brings up terrible memories and so you just shut them out? Or do you spend time really ruminating on that, really thinking about the implications of how who you are now has been crafted by your past experiences, and then get the benefit of things like acceptance of where you came from, acceptance of where you're at now, enough to be able to move forward, and the ability to gain things like self-confidence and self-trust, having ruminated over the times that you overcame obstacles and were true to your word. When you go into elements of your thoughts and beliefs and the way you talk to yourself, all all right? The conversations you have in your head and the logic and sense making that is created inside of your desire to get to your true self, which is a person of competence, capability, skill, and performance. Do you have a relationship with that part of yourself that is undermining to your self-esteem or emboldens it, makes it driven to do the best it can? And when you look at your relationship to the outside world and building resource and engaging with resource, the ability to have energy, the ability to put attention to things that mean something to you, the ability to get those goals accomplished and to push yourself into bigger things. What's your relationship to that part? When you're auditing yourself, how do you engage and interact with that piece of who you are? When you're looking at your relationship to your own emotional processing, to your convictions and beliefs, to your intentions and motivations, do you push that away because emotions are things that just get in the way of productivity? Do you push them away because there's a bunch of stuff in there that you don't want to wake up dragons? Or do you embrace that part of who you are? When you look at relationships to other people, do you have a tendency to outsource that to maybe your partner or others? Do you look at people in terms of understanding their needs? Do you look at yourself in terms of understanding your needs? Are you getting your needs met? Do you have a bunch of one-sided relationships? Are you tapped into culture and the bigger implications of your actions and how they impact others? What's your relationship to that piece of the audit? When you get into your intuitive components, are you somebody who sees the possibilities in front of you? Do you understand opportunities? Do you have quality conversations that allow you to problem solve in a bigger way? Are you tapped into being able to channel the wisdom of the universe or channel other people's wisdom through conversation? And are you able to capture possibilities? Are you able to understand the importance of disruptive technologies, or at least their inevitability? And what about the narrative of your life and your purpose? Where are you headed? What is the most probable path that you are on right now while you're doing the audit and after you're done with the audit? What are the things that are coming up for you? What is emerging? What are the weak points, the dark points, the high points? What cans are you kicking? And where is this going to end if it continues on in this direction?
Yeah, we want you to do this audit on your own if you can. Go ahead and try this. Try your hand at auditing these areas of your life. We'd also like to invite you to come and join us for our Personality Life Path. It's a mentorship set up specifically to do what we're talking about. Auditing each of these 8 slices of your life, finding out where you are on each one of them, reflecting on that, having some conversation, discussion with other people of like minds just like you in a community format, and understanding all of this, and then having action steps to apply it in your life in the real world to get reference points. Mm-hmm. It's one thing just to understand something, but we believe that true learning equals behavior change. So you're going to go out in the world and you're going to test some of these energies. Maybe they're not natural to you, but you can test how they show up for you, audit them, get a reference point and say, okay, that's something I can maybe work on. Or, well, I've got that dialed in. I think that's really set for my life. I can tweak it here a little bit, but I'd really like to focus on this area. So going through each layer of these is what we want to do with you in our Life Path mentorship. We're going to take 8 weeks. It's an online virtual experience. We'll take one of those energies each week and we'll talk about it in its complexity, in its energetic, archetypical, energetic showing up in your life. Then we'll show how it applies to personality types specifically, whether it's your type or someone else's in your life. And then we'll talk about how to apply this and go test it in the real world. Each week we'll do one of these. And then we want to get together in a live event at the very end of that experience. And we'd love for you to be a part of this. Yeah. I think it's going to change your life if you do.
It's a mentorship and a coaching experience that allows you to really start to gain a, we're trying to help you create a life path. We're trying to help you create a plan of attack so that these areas of your life that could be maximized, the areas of your life where you're leaving money on the table, and the areas of your life that maybe you shouldn't expend that much energy towards, but you should be building people and resources to be able to subsidize those components. We want all of that to be flipped up so that it's no longer shadow work. It is now ego work. It's now in the conscious. You're making the unconscious conscious. And as Jung said, it will no longer control your life from the shadows, and you will no longer call it fate.
So check out the link associated with this video to join or find out more information about the Personality Life Path mentorship. Antonia and myself will be personally invested and involved in this. We're going to work with people in real time, virtually. It's a live experience. It's not pre-recorded. So you'll get to get feedback from us, have conversations, hot seat, Q&A, all the things that a mentorship involves. And if you can make it to the live event component, we'd also love to meet you in person and get to experience your actual physical energy. We'll get to meet you at a live event.
This is one of our passion projects This is something that we are deeply invested in.
Yeah.
Doing this for ourselves was a game changer. So we can't wait to share with you all the things that we've learned, all the strategies, all the exercises, and all the ways that the rubber hits the road when it comes to understanding these energies and your personality type.